Welcome to Worthy Ones, the video series where each and every week I share with you my thoughts on the newest issue 1 comic books that I read for the current comic book week. I'm Mike Spiderslayer. Welcome back to Comic Book Corner 2.0. If you love daily comic book content, if you love me helping you make decisions on what comic books to buy, you guys came to the right place. And also, guys, if you want to help support the channel, why don't you consider being a member of my YouTube channel, Comic Book Corner 2.0. For as low as 99 cents, you guys can get stickers on your comments, you can get monthly badges, you can also get early releases for my videos as well. So again, consider becoming a member. So with that being said, guys, let's get started with this issue 1 type of heavy week when it comes to this week's comic books. The Batman First Night. This is issue 1. This is a magazine format, 48 pages for the low cost of $7. We have Dan Jurgens and Mike Perkins on this book. The artwork in this book is pretty cool as it's set back in the late 30s, early 40s, lots of Nazi talk. This is set 15 years after Bruce Wayne's parents died. Commissioner Gordon obviously had a relationship with the Waynes, and that's why he's friendly with Bruce Wayne in the comic. And we can see this is basically the early years of Batman set in this time frame. If you're expecting any Robins or anything like that, we don't have any of this. It's basically old school detective work. There was a congressman that wound up getting beheaded, and we get to see them trying to solve this case. We do get to see some action in this comic. I don't want to say there was a lot of action, but when it was happening, it was actually really good. Basically, for me, this comic was worthy. However, I'm not going to continue it. I think that for me, anyway, I don't know. I think you have to be a more diehard of a Batman fan, and you got to be a fan of like this time period. And I'm not really that big into stuff happening in the late 30s, early 40s. And I felt that this comic in a lot of scenes was much dragged out. I felt that this didn't need to be the 48 pages that it had. Some would say, well, it gives it time to breathe, and it gives you time to really dig into the detective work in here, which I could understand. But I did find myself bored at times with this. So I might be in the minority with people when it comes to this, but I just was kind of like, is this going to end soon? Because I wasn't all that entertained by it. It had some cool elements, and like I said, I might be in the minority here, but for me, this was just an average book, so I'm gonna give this one a C. Let me know what you guys thought. Are you with me, or are you not with me on this one? And would you pay another $7 for this? Giant Size Spider-Gwen. This is issue 1. This is another big book, 48 pages for $7. And this one was written by Jason Latour, and Melissa Flores does the artwork in this one. This is kind of coming off the heels of Spider-Gwen Smash, because based off of what you read in Spider-Gwen Smash, Mary Jane is now the Carnage in this Earth, okay? And she has been, I guess, infected by gamma rays, and it's affecting her anger and her controlling the symbiote within her. And we get introduced to a new character in this comic book, and it's Otto Octavius's adopted son. So that's what you get introduced to. So this is a first appearance in the comic book, and he wants Mary Jane so he can study her symbiote and whatnot. So throughout the entire comic book, we wind up seeing these two on the run against this Otto Octavius. They go to Natasha for help, and we get to see the kind of relationship that's developing between Mary Jane and Spider-Gwen. I think Mary Jane is starting to understand what Spider-Gwen is going through now that she has this Carnage symbiote. So I get to see the emotional aspect of them growing closer with each other, but just as their relationship relationship starts to grow, Carnage, or I should say Mary Jane in this world, says she has to go away, that she has to learn to contain herself, otherwise she could actually kill somebody. And they share this heartfelt moment and they say goodbye, and then that's the end. This book is not worthy. So even though I get the emotional piece when it comes to the two characters, this book was a lot of nothing. There was a lot of just running around, escaping from this version of Otto Octavius. And then what you're doing is you're paying $7 really for, a reprint of another story that's happened. So if you read Spider-Gwen Smash, you kind of feel like, oh, I need to read this to, see the connection here between that story, and it just wasn't worth it. There just was not a real payoff here. So even though there's a little bit of emotion in this book, it's just like I said, it's not a worthy comic. And at the end of the day, I'm going to give this one a D. The art wasn't that great either. So this one is definitely a pass. Ms. Marvel Mutant Menace. This is issue 1. This is a 28-page comic for $5. The writer here is Aman Vellani and Sabir Pereza. The art is done by Scott Kalowski, if I said that name right. The artwork is pretty good in this comic. I love the way the characters look. The facial expressions are really cool. We get to see the mutants still living down in their underground base of operations, the Morlock tunnels, and we get to see Ms. Marvel struggling with her powers. They seem to be malfunctioning here or there, and she's also struggling to be like hero and just everyday girl, everyday teenager. So it was kind of cool for the X-Men to sit there and say, hey, you need to live your life as well. So why don't you go up there, go to school, make your appearance, be Kamala. And she was like, okay. She's like, I just want to help people at the same time. So that was kind of cool, There was some comical moments here between Bruno and Kamala. One of the scenes was like when they were playing dodgeball. It was hilarious because Bruno gets bonked, Kamala gets bonked. I was just like, yeah, that's awesome, So there was some decent moments in this comic, but there wasn't enough for me to really continue on going forward. So for me, this book is just not worthy. It's a book where when you read it, yes, you hear Aman Vellani's voice as Kamala, which I think maybe that's what you want, but there's just too much of nothing. And when you got to the action, you got introduced to some plant-like guy. So this person, which is a mutant, right? And then we wind up getting to see her go to this concert at the end of it and winds up seeing who is it? Lila Cheney. So I was like, there's just not enough here. Comics are expensive, and I read a lot of new number ones every single week. So for me to continue these new series, it's got to blow me away. And there wasn't anything here that really got me hooked, right? I can sit there and read comic books with talking heads all day, but if there's no hook or if there's nothing there that doesn't interest me going forward, I'm just going to drop it. I love the character, but honestly, nobody has written her better than G. Willow Wilson, the creator of Ms. Marvel. So maybe this might be a better series as time goes along, but it's just not for me, guys. And at the end of the day, this was another very average comic book. This was probably a C- in my eyes. Weapon X-Men, this is issue 1. This is a 40-page comic for $6. The writer here is Christos Gage, and the art is done by Yelandri Sinar. Hopefully I said that name right. Here's the interior artwork. It's not too bad. There's some cool action scenes when you do see it actually happen. There's a different form of Avengers, and I'll explain that in a little while, because obviously they go to a different Earth, and they're called the Uncanny Avengers. So the artwork wasn't bad, but what was this comic book about? Well, if this is actually a continuation of a story that happened a couple months ago, written by Christos Gage, that was attached to Jean Grey, and she got the X-Men together to do a time travel thing and try to stop, I guess, Magneto then, and here now it's continuing, but has to deal with Wolverines. It's kind of complicated. It's kind of like this comic book as well. It's very convoluted. There's a lot of history. You would think for an issue 1, you would not have to understand everything in the world of freaking Phoenix and X-Men and everything else to get what was going on here. But nevertheless, let's move forward. So in this book, Jean Grey recruits a multiverse of Wolverines to go ahead and stop Onslaught, and they have to protect this Earth. That's basically what it is. And the Wolverines that they come across are these guys right here. So yeah, you get to see them. There's Beer Gut Wolverine, there's Zombie Wolverine, there's Old Man Logan, there's Jane Howlett, and then there's this one right here, this guy right there. So they all come together, and Jean Grey recruits them to go to this Earth to try to stop Onslaught from destroying this Earth. And it's Earth 93068, if you can remember that. It's like a freaking combination to a locker, right? And so the Uncanny Avengers go to the Wolverines, and they wind up starting to attack them. We find out that they're all friends, and they're here for a mission to save this Earth, and they're coming up with this plan, and there's this whole battle that happens, and let's just say, like, Onslaught escapes, and they have to continue the fight in the next issue. I mean, it is what it is. It's nothing great or spectacular, right? It was just cool seeing some of these characters on the pages. There was some funny scenes between the Wolverines, especially like the Beer Gut Wolverine and the Zombie Wolverine, because he always wanted to eat something, and he was like the most comical guy in the comic book. So it did have some laughs in there. But for a comic book, it just also was not worthy. It's kind of convoluted, man. It's all over the place. It's just not something that is top tier quality, reading here. So it is just another week with new number ones that are just not that great. And at the end of the day, if I grade this comic book, guys, this one is a D+. It just was like, oh, this is pretty bad. If it wasn't for a freaking zombie Wolverine here, right, I would be bored to death. He's the only one that put any real entertainment in this comic. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles: The Last Ronin Revolution, Issue 1. That's a long name, man. 52 pages for the price of $9. It's an expensive comic book. This one's written by Tom Wells and Kevin Eastman. The art is done by Ben Bishop. When you're reading this comic book, the tone feels the same throughout. It's kind of hard to explain, and the layouts are not all that great either. It just is very simplistic. It goes across the book almost the entire way, and what that does is that interferes with the reading experience, especially when there's as much narration on what's going on in this comic book. You gotta really open up that spine here, because this is a thick book, and you gotta go right in there and read. It interferes with the artwork a little bit, and the only thing that really stood out, that really made the colors pop for me, was when you had the flashback pages. And the flashback pages I felt were needed in this comic book to get new readers on board to understand what is the history of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. However, if you're a longtime reader of this, it's not necessary, and you might find yourself a little bit bored because you know this story. So for me, I felt like this took me out a little bit, even though I could understand why they did it, because I've read Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles since they were created, right? But like I said, the tone of this book is pretty much the same all the way across. All these panels, all this narration, and this is really about, getting the new reader on board. It's about Casey trying to help control the whole gang thing that's going on in the city, and we get to see a little bit of the Turtles be their young selves. And I kind of want to see that more in this series, okay? And I'll explain that in a second. But I'm going to deem this book worthy. I'm going to try issue 2. I might be an unpopular opinion here, but this wasn't my favorite book. This was not a 5-star book. This book did not wow me like the original Last Ronin with Michelangelo, right? It's not the same. These characters are still new for me. I still am yet to see their personalities at this older age, and I want to see them interact with each other more besides the fighting. I think the personality of the Turtles is very important. That's what made the Turtles so likable from the beginning. It's not just about the action and the fighting. For me, it's about them interacting with each other. So I want to know more about Moha and Odin and Uno and Yi, and being them getting to sneak out onto the city and trying to lie to Casey. That was the fun moment for me in this comic. But besides all that action and flashback stuff, I was kind of bored. You get to see a news broadcast that was like 2-3 pages long. They threw in a little Easter egg with like Amanda Connor being the news broadcaster and Jimmy Palmiotti being the mayor of the city, which I thought was kind of funny. But in all reality, at the end of the day, I wasn't overly impressed. Like I said, I'm going to deem this one worthy, trying to go for an issue 2. But again, I might be in a minority here, not reading the previous volume of this. I only read like 2 issues of it. So I'm going to give this one like a C+. You know, I understand a lot of the stuff that they did in here, but sometimes having a lot of action is not always better. I feel like you got to focus on these turtles a little bit more. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below, guys. Am I right? Am I wrong? I know there is no right or wrong. I guess at the end of the day, we're all entitled to our own opinion, but this is just my thought process behind it. The Spectacular Spider-Man. This is issue 1. This is a 40-page comic for $5. Greg Weisman here is the writer. He did the Spectacular Spider-Man TV cartoon show. And here we have Humberto Ramos that does the artwork. I'm telling you, between all the Spider-Man books that are out right now, if you mesh them all together, eventually they're going to make one great Spider-Man comic. I got Humberto Ramos, who did the artwork in Amazing Spider-Man with Dan Slott in the past. We wound up getting Ultimate Spider-Man, who seems to have a great writer attached to it right now and is more of a true essence of the character. And then here we wind up getting to have a fun comic book with Miles and Peter together. I feel like this is a series that is long overdue, because when it comes to Miles Morales Spider-Man, this is a character that should be with Peter more often, you know, instead of apart. And I think these two together can make a dynamic duo. The artwork in here, again, by Humberto Ramos, is a lot of fun. I like how he draws Spider-Man. You know, he draws the facial expressions on his eyes, which I think is pretty cool. You wind up getting to see like his skinny, gangly figure, but it works for a character like Spider-Man. We also wind up getting to see like them do the battle against was it the Jackal in this comic, as he's taking like a different form and whatnot. And yeah, so this book had a lot of good action going for it. So what did I think about the two characters in this comic? Well, Peter has come up with this thing of them meeting together on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. and just hanging out. Well, it happens to be now they're doing web slinging with each other, fighting villains, right? And it's kind of cool because they're going to Empire State University. They're going to go to the Coffee Bean. They're going to have their favorite drink. And I thought that was pretty cool. Wednesdays was a great day because it's New Comic Book Day. Maybe that was intentional. I don't know. But it was cool just seeing these guys, you know, go to the shop with each other, and Peter like trying to be a regular, and he's like old school. He goes to the counter and he like orders, while Miles is like, you know, the Generation Z type of guy who winds up using his app to order stuff. And we get to see, you know, again, Peter just sit there and go, you gotta order, you know, you gotta remember my order. And there was a panel in there where it took him like a whole page for this guy Kenny to remember his entire order. And you know, that may sound stupid, but that adds real humor and to the book, and I really enjoyed that lightheartedness of this comic. Now, there's a little bit of like some weird, you know, flashback scenes that were taking place that said then and then now, that interrupted the story, where I was like, I don't get what they're going with that, and maybe that will come in time, right? But Miles was cool because he's thinking about applying to Empire State University. We got, you know, Peter Parker flirting with the girl in there and stuff. This book is worthy. I thought this was a fun time. I can't wait to see where they'll take the direction of this story going forward. Obviously, this is just an introduction of, you know, things to come and this mystery that happens at the end of the comic book. But this was probably one of my most fun comic books that I read this week. And at the end of the day, I'm going to give this one a B+. I can't give it an A or an A- for that matter, because like I said, it was a book that had a lot of insert pages where it was like, then, now, then, now. And that kind of like interrupted the flow of the story. There's obviously a purpose here, but we'll see where that goes going forward. But a solid Spider-Man story. Here we go, the big one of the week, Ultimate X-Men issue 1. We had Ultimate Spider-Man, Ultimate Black Panther, Ultimate X-Men. So, when it comes to this book, it's written by Peach Momoko, and artwork is done by Peach Momoko. This book has definitely a interesting feel to it. This is like a manga book, except it's a comic book. It reads left to right, right? It has a very much supernatural element to this comic book, and there's not a lot of dialogue, so you're going to read through this comic book quite quickly, and you can read it quite a few times to understand, what's happening here in this book, okay? The one thing that I can let you know is that if you're expecting X-Men, you're not going to get that in this comic book. You're not going to see any X-Men. There's no mention of X-Men. So if you were expecting that, you're going to be disappointed. This is a story about Hiyashiko Ichiki. Okay, and she is a young girl that goes to school that is obviously picked on by other girls in here as well, and she went through a traumatic experience by losing her friend to suicide. That's what happens here, and her mutant powers are manifested by trauma, kind of like how X-Men powers occur. Like if you go back to Jean Grey with her situation, right? Look how her powers manifested, and you get to see that happen in this comic book when it comes to her colliding with a vehicle in here. Okay, so it's a coming of age book. It's them. I guess it's her acquiring her powers and trying to figure out what these powers are. There's no Professor Xavier. There's nothing here. It's about a single individual just getting these powers for the first time, and how she witnesses this and how she goes through this trauma. And you get to see, again, the loss of her friend, the suicide situation that has happened. It's that type of style of book. Okay, so if, again, you're expecting X-Men book, that's not what this is. So this book, though, is worthy. Even though there's no sign of X-Men or Professor Xavier or any of the other characters, I'm very curious where Peach Momoko is going to go with this one. At the end of it, she introduces kind of like the Japanese culture of what all these things mean that were inside the comic book as well. But I wonder if this is going to be a real slow burn type of style of comic, right? If we're going to get introduced to the Mayday Storm and some of the other mutants, and then eventually they're going to come together. That's still yet to be determined, right? But if you're expecting this team right away, like I said, it's not happening, guys. It's something completely different. It's obviously Peach Momoko's vision here, and maybe this fleshes out the characters a little bit more, so when maybe they eventually become a team, you appreciate them more. So you gotta respect Peach Momoko's talent. I think she's a very talented person. Obviously, she writes differently from American everyday comics, right? So if this is not your style, I totally get it, right? This is not what I was expecting either, but I am on board with this, and I will respect where her journey is going here. So I'm going to stay on board with this one. It's going to be a B for me. I wasn't like blown away by it, but it was an interesting storytelling. The one thing that I can't stand, though, is this lettering. It's so small, and it's like different fonts and everything, and it threw me off. But besides that, it was just different, and I like different. It doesn't mean different's bad, right? So yeah, we'll see where Ultimate X-Men goes next, and we'll see if they continue with Armor's story progression, or we go to the next character. So there you have it, guys. There are my thoughts on this week's new #1 comics. I want to hear all those comments below. Wasn't the best week for new #1s, but sometimes we need a #2 to figure out if a series is going to be good or not. So as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll leave you more content right here. This is everything that I bought for the current comic book week. Guys, remember, support the local comic shops. Keep buying, keep collecting, but always remember, read those comics. Guys, I'll see you real soon.